Namaskar and welcome to our continued coverage of the conflict in Ukraine. And our guests on the program tonight are Ambassador Mohan Kumar, a former senior diplomat and chairman of RIS, and Professor Swaran Singh is from the School of International Studies, JNU, and Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma is Distinguished Fellow and from the Vivekananda International Foundation and also from the Center for Land Warfare Studies. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. Professor Swaran Singh, Ambassador Mohan Kumar has brought in that economic aspect, and the question that comes to mind is that Russia had to wrap this up fast because, I mean, its costs will be mounting, isn't it, if it continues in this form. And over a period of time, the economic costs could be quite devastating for Russia.
You're right, Mark. Costs definitely are daunting because United States and its friends and allies have bulk of global GDP, in that sense, bulk of global trade and investments. And Russia, in terms of its economic strength and wherewithal to withstand such pressure, has enormous limitations. Now, where Russia does not reflect limitations is President Putin's control on politics, and therefore his capacity to withstand all these sanctions and pressure. Now, also, I think he's encouraged, and you should notice that both sides continue to kind of project their leverages. And now President Putin actually is threatening European nations that he is the one who could potentially, switch off the tap, and that they would be the ones who will be the victims of over-dependence of gas and oil. Russia is the largest producer of world's gas, and 40% of European gas comes from Russia.
Right.
So for last year, for example, Russia has earned over $100 billion selling gas and oil to European nations.
Right.
And Putin has his own leverages, which is showcasing, I think, compared to Western nations who are liberal democracies and dependent on their domestic constituencies very often. Putin apparently has this advantage of not having to deal with an opposition at home. And in that sense, I think what is interesting in this conflict is, of course, it is going on beyond everybody's belief, but a certain kind of orchestration of mutual tacit understanding of humanitarian corridors, ceasefires, 3 rounds of talks, and that obviously means that there is a certain communication on both sides. Now, communication may not be as per the desires of both sides. The aims and objectives placed in front of each other may not be agreeable to each side.
Right.
The level may not be agreeable, but just 10 seconds, I think India becomes significant here. In having communicated repeatedly with both President Putin and also President Zelensky, asking them to have a direct communication and direct conversation, and repeatedly underlining the need for safety of not just Indian citizens, but people on the ground, and that may have partly contributed to this humanitarian corridors and ceasefires repeatedly happening. Which I think is an opportunity that India should continue to pursue.
Professor Swaran Singh, so the point is that Russia supplies 7% of the requirements of the world, and they understand their value, and they're willing to, according to some traders, sell at much below the market rate. This is a perfectly competitive market. So even if they impose sanctions and Russia is willing to sell at less, probably people will be willing to buy because, I mean, the whole world is going to be affected. Their economies are going to be affected. So Russia is probably banking on supplying even at $20 less than the market rate.
Absolutely. And Russia will not be the first country under such Western sanctions. Several countries facing Western sanctions have tried to sell oil, sometimes even in the black market, not just on the lower price. And Russia possibly would offer countries like India, discounted price.
Right.
And look at the fact that United States, which is a surplus energy producer, has taken 13 days to put this ban on the purchase of oil from Russia. Europeans are not as yet showing any sign of boycotting purchase of gas and oil from Russia. India, of course, is enormously dependent on import of energy, and the crude prices, if you understand, just from 1st December to now have gone up from $70 per gallon to 150. So India will look for opportunities because the bill for import of oil is going to be enormously hitting Indian economy. And it's no problem because India and Russia have had history of something called friendship prices during the Soviet Union. And if Russia is willing to offer oil to India on much discounted price, I think India would consider that taking. But it's not just limited to just one commodity, oil. Prices of gold, nickel, wheat, and generally the turmoil in international market is what I think is also going to impact India and other nations. And I think that is a difficult challenge for India to deal with. And I think also in this sense, if the prices of oil are going up, so also prices of Russian oil would be going up. And therefore the bargain that Russia can then do with both Europeans and other customers. China has already increased on 4th of February. They signed another contract for another 30 years, increasing purchase by about 22 to 25% and promised to pay them Russians in euros. So Russia has its own sources where it can continue to supply its energy, and that is the main source of its export. And in that sense, I think last point is a small economy. I think that one has to understand. Russia is not a very large economy. It's not even one of the top 10 economies in the world. And then you imagine how much of transactions Russia would then have which are coming under threat. Energy is more or less not coming under threat. And therefore sanctions can be far more symbolic. But how much they are going to actually impact on, other than the investor confidence and the overall image of Russia in international market. And, I'm emphasizing the fact that Putin is not so much impacted upon by unrest at home. In that sense, he could continue pursuing his war in Ukraine for a longer period of time. And in any case, sanctions are a long-term impact. They don't impact his punch on the ground as we speak now. And so in that sense, I think this sanctions are divided house in the West, more or less. Sanctions are selected, sanctions are long-term, and they are largely symbolic in that sense. And even the smallest countries like North Korea have shown how much sanctions can dent on the willingness of leadership if they